This is the biggest plot twist in the classic American TV series Breaking Bad, and it is the most devastating setback Walter has ever faced. By the end, you can't help but admit that this is a textbook-level drama series. Picking up from the previous episode, what Walter never expected was that just as Jesse was about to burn down his house, Hank suddenly appeared with a gun and stopped the agitated Jesse in time. Because Hank had been secretly monitoring Jesse beforehand, he ordered Jesse to put out the fire. Seeing Jesse's deep hatred for Walter, Hank, who also despised Walter, agreed to bring Walter to justice. Thus, these two former adversaries began to cooperate. Just as Hank's car was leaving, Walter arrived at his doorstep from the car wash, perfectly missing the critical information. This laid the groundwork for Walter's tragic fate later on. Hank didn't dare to take Jesse to the DEA office but brought him to his own house instead. Worried that Marie might disagree, Hank packed Marie's bags in advance and sent her to a hotel for a few days. Seeing Jesse brought into their home, Marie only cared about whether this would be detrimental to Walter. As she seemed willing to do anything against Walter, Marie reminded him that a phone was ringing. It turned out to be Jesse's phone. Hank overheard Walter's message to Jesse.
Jesse, listen, obviously, you've changed your mind here. I want to fix this, okay? Whatever it takes, right? We'll talk and we will fix this. Till then, just sleep it off, okay? And then call me. Be safe.
When Jesse wakes up, he sees Marie, which makes him look a little constrained.
Would you like some coffee?
At this point, Hank has called Steven to help him, and he's ready to record Jesse's statement against Walter, but Jesse claimed that Walter had already quit the contraband trade, and now there was no substantial evidence to accuse Walter of any crime. Steven felt helpless about this. At this point, Hank found a breakthrough in the case.
I'm gonna be at Civic Plaza tomorrow at noon. I hope you'll give me the chance to explain myself. Talk through everything once and for all. I'll be alone and unarmed. So if you want to come and shoot me in the head, that's up to you. Either way, I'm in your hands.
This was also Walter's heartfelt confession. Hank asked Jesse to meet with Walter and preemptively installed a listening device on him, but Jesse didn't trust Walter at all, fearing that this was a trap set by Walter, and that once he showed up, Walter's hired killers would take him out. However, Hank didn't think so. Based on Jesse's testimony, the astute Hank saw that Walter cared for Jesse. This is what they call the onlooker seeing more clearly than the participant. Naive Jesse couldn't see Walter's care and protection for him. Jesse strongly opposed Hank's proposal, but in his current predicament, he had no choice. If he didn't follow Hank's orders, he would face prison time. Steven was also concerned about the potential danger to Jesse, but Hank asserted that even if Jesse got killed, they could record evidence. This shows that Hank was willing to go to any lengths to capture Walter. The next day, under Hank's plan, they secretly recorded Walter's actions. After Hank set up the listening device on Jesse, Jesse nervously walked toward Walter's location. At that moment, Jesse suddenly saw a man in black staring at him from the corner, and he concluded that this was the hitman Walter had arranged in advance. Terrified, Jesse stopped in his tracks, hesitated for a moment, and then turned and walked away. Jesse then went to a phone booth where he thought he was smart enough to contact Walter.
I'm not doing what you want anymore. Okay, asshole?
This is just a heads up to let you know I'm coming for you. See, I decided that burning down your house is nothing.
Next time I'm gonna get you where you really live.
Jesse, listen.
Jesse? Jesse?
In this way, Jesse didn't give Walter a chance to explain, and Walter left in disappointment. The man Jesse saw was just a stranger playing with his child in the square. Feeling smug, Jesse was glad he didn't fall for Walter's trap, but this infuriated Hank.
What were you thinking? What the hell was that all about, huh? I little...
To get him, there's another way.
It seemed Jesse had a better idea. Deeply disappointed, Walter finally decided to take action against Jesse. Walter sought help from Todd's uncle Jack, but Jack's condition was that Walter teach them how to produce contraband. Since Todd had been involved in Walter's business, Jack knew that this trade was much more lucrative than their previous extermination work. With no other choice, Walter agreed. However, due to Todd's lack of skill, the quality of the contraband dropped sharply, which made Lydia very anxious. To eliminate Jesse as a threat, the reluctant Walter had no choice but to agree.
Time is of the essence, do you understand?
to him tonight if you want. Just tell me where he is.
I don't know where he is, but I know how to flush him out.
In order to successfully draw Jesse out, Walter contacted Jesse's ex-girlfriend, Andrea. Walter claimed that he had done everything he could to not find Jesse and wanted Andrea's help in reaching him. After Walter left, he notified Jack and his men, who were lying in wait, to take Jesse out and dispose of his body as soon as he appeared. Walter didn't want Andrea and the child to see this, but what Walter never expected was that Hank intercepted the voicemail. Meanwhile, Jesse provided a crucial clue to catch Walter. They needed to find his stash of money. Although Jesse didn't know the exact location, he knew that Saul's two men were definitely involved. So they came up with a plan. Hank poured freshly bought pig brains on the ground and added some pig blood to create the illusion that Jesse had been killed. Then they went to trick Saul's man, Huel. Hank told Huel that Walter had already dealt with QB and Jesse, and now Huel was the only one left, keeping him there to protect the witness. Then he showed Huel the fake death photo of Jesse. Huel was scared to tears and confessed all the details of how he helped Walter move the money, but he didn't know where Walter had hidden it. Upon learning that the vehicle Walter used to move the money was rented, they hurried to investigate its information. After Hank's investigation, they were disappointed to find that the car didn't have a GPS installed. Just when they thought the trail had gone cold, the clever Hank came up with another sneaky plan to make Walter reveal the location of the money. Hank forged a photo of the barrels where Walter had hidden the cash and sent it to Walter. Seeing these photos, Walter was terrified. Then Jesse called.
Got my photo? That barrel looked familiar because I just found 6 more exactly like it.
Hearing what Jesse said, Walter didn't have time to explain to his wife and immediately rushed to the place where he had hidden the money.
Yes. How do you like that, genius? Yes, you didn't think of everything.
Look, Jesse, I don't know what you plan on doing here, but...
Well, I'll give you a hint, Walt. It involves a couple of 5-gallon cans of gasoline and a lighter.
No, Jesse, please, listen to me.
No, you listen to me, bitch. You get your ass out here as fast as you can.
Yes, I'm coming, okay?
All right, well, you better hurry, because I'm burning 10 grand a minute till you get here, starting right now.
I said I'm coming. Don't you touch my money.
All the way, Walter kept talking to Jesse on the phone. At this moment, Walter didn't have time to think much. He was walking step by step into Hank's trap.
I'm dying. My cancer is bad. You're not hurting anyone but my family. Okay? Look, I can't spend this money. It's not for me. I won't be around long enough to use it. It belongs to my children.
Oh, you're gonna talk about kids. You're seriously gonna go there?
I am sorry about Brock.
No, you're not.
I am.
You're not, but you're gonna be.
Yes, I am sorry about Brock. Don't you think I knew exactly how much to give him? I ran over those gangbangers. I killed Emilio and Crazy 8Y. I did all of those things to try to save your life as much as mine. Only you're too stupid to know it.
The angry Walter also spoke from his heart. He had indeed done a lot for Jesse, but unfortunately, Jesse couldn't see it. At that moment, Jesse fell silent because Hank had tracked Walter's location through the call. There was no need for Walter to continue talking to Jesse to prevent Jesse from being swayed by him again. When Walter arrived at the place where the money was hidden, he found no one there. It was then that Walter realized he had been duped. He quickly removed the battery from his phone and threw it away. Walter then climbed to a high point to observe the surroundings but found nothing unusual. Just as Walter was about to stop and catch his breath, he saw a car speeding towards him in the distance. He quickly went back to pick up the discarded phone and reinserted the battery. Walter was certain that Jesse had come prepared and wasn't alone, so he urgently called Jack and the others for support, providing them with the exact coordinates. However, when Walter saw that it was Jesse accompanied by Hank and Steven, he felt utterly despairing. After a moment of thought, Walter told Jack and the others not to come, but his tone was filled with helplessness. Walter then hung up the phone. This action left Jack and the others puzzled. Hearing Hank loudly ordering him to surrender, Walter wept in despair, knowing he was trapped. Thus, under Hank's command, Walter was finally captured by Hank. At this point, Jesse flashed an infuriating, foolish grin. Faced with his family, Walter chose to surrender rather than continue down a dark path, which made us sympathize with him once again. Hank, proud of his cleverness, began to boast about his achievement, but Walter ignored his flaunting and stared intently at Jesse. This time, Walter had been severely betrayed by this foolish partner. When Walter had asked Jack to kill Jesse before, Jack had even asked if Jesse was a snitch, but Walter had adamantly denied it. He never expected that Jesse would end up cooperating with Hank and becoming the most effective informant. Walter was furious, and a confrontation erupted on the spot.
Coward.
Get over here! Get over here! Get in the truck, will you? Bring it up! Put him in the car! Come on! Get in the car! Hurry up! Get it!
Walter and Jesse were pushed into the car, and Hank immediately called Marie to inform her of the news. Hearing that Walter had been captured by Hank, Marie finally breathed a sigh of relief, but she didn't know this would be their last conversation, because at that moment, Walter suddenly saw several cars approaching. He knew it must be Jack's man. Walter shouted desperately, but Hank didn't hear him. As for why Jack and his man showed up even though Walter had called off the action, it could be because they sensed Walter was in danger and were worried that if something happened to him, there would be no one left to teach them how to produce contraband. Thus, a standoff between the police and criminals ensued, ready to erupt into a firefight. Walter screamed in an attempt to stop the impending clash, but handcuffed, he was powerless. Jesse, sitting in Walter's car, was also terrified. After a brief standoff, the inevitable firefight finally broke out.